Hi, everyone. This is Phil Travis, and this announcement, it's week 3 here at EOU, and this announcement is for History 458. I'll try to make this announcement a little bit brief. Um, so this week we are going to be reading from our McPherson book. We're looking at chapters 3 and 5 from McPherson. We have a quiz on chapter 5 from McPherson, similar to last week's quiz. So remember, when you're taking those quizzes, I know it's a big book, but when you read, highlight key ideas. Remember, when authors write, a lot of times you open the paragraph with something important and you end the paragraph with a pretty important summation of the point of the paragraph. So as you read, make sure you highlight the things you think are most important. Go back and review your highlights. Use your book while you take the quiz, and this will help you when you. I'm laughing because this house has many animals in it, and they all make all kinds of funny sounds. I think the cat just turned on the printer. But anyway, use your highlighter, use your book when you take the quiz. It'll really help you. Of course, this week, the primary topic this week, of course, we're looking at the 1850s more broadly, the lead up to the American Civil War, but we're also going to be looking at the topic of bleeding Kansas, which in some respects could be regarded as the beginning of the American Civil War. So see my recorded lecture is up there for you. So take a look at that. It'll really help you with the subject. A lot of you have been watching my recorded lectures, and I'm really happy about that. Takes a lot of work to do those, and so I like to see it when students are engaging those lectures, those recorded lectures, and using them and helping them to learn the material in the class. So that really makes me happy to see that. So reading chapter 3 and 5 from McPherson. We have a quiz on chapter 5 from McPherson. My recorded lecture is up there for you. Topic this week is bleeding Kansas. So let me get to the factoid. The factoid for this week is this. In a lot of respects, the Civil War kind of begins over Kansas, though it's before the election of Abraham Lincoln, it's before Fort Sumter. You could argue that the first true violence associated with the lead up to the American Civil War begins in Kansas in 1857, in the late 1850s. And the reason for this is the decision to divide Kansas-Nebraska territory into two chunks and to allow popular sovereignty to be the determinant on whether the territories would enter the Union as a state, free or slave. The idea was devised largely by Stephen Douglas, who is, of course, the Illinois Democrat. He will become famous for his debates with Abraham Lincoln. Stephen Douglas wanted, the United States is preparing to build, ultimately to build a transcontinental railroad line. Of course, that will not be completed until 1869, but there were disputes over which route that line, the first one, should take. And Stephen Douglas wanted the transcontinental line to have a terminus in Chicago, and so he sought to organize the broad area that is the Kansas-Nebraska territory. An area that today includes Kansas, Nebraska, parts of the Dakotas, Ohio, and so Iowa. I'm sorry, not Ohio, and so forth. And so Stephen Douglas says we need to organize these areas in the interest of, having a railroad terminus in Chicago, in Illinois. And so Stephen Douglas becomes the champion of the idea of popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty was the idea that when it comes to the issue of whether a state will be free or slave, it should be down to the votes of the people, that the people should have the right to decide whether you're free or slave, which makes a lot of sense. Democratically, that makes a tremendous amount of sense. But in the case of Kansas, it really ignites a tremendous problem. Because Kansas, which you'll note, is above the 3630 line, the Missouri Compromise line. So if you believe that the Missouri Compromise line should be extended across, it's to the north of that state, right? And of course, it's to the north of that line. And so this idea certainly challenges that. But in addition, when it's made aware, when it's made known that whether or not Kansas will be a slave state or a free state will be based on the votes of the people, then what happens is you have a descent of pro-slave owners from Missouri and other states that are pro-slavery going into Kansas, and you have the descent of abolitionists and free state advocates, free soil advocates descending into Kansas from their respective places, all trying to sway Kansas, as Kansas will create its state. Its own state sort of constitution. Both sides are trying to sway Kansas to be either free or slave, and so ultimately this will descend into some significant violence. Here's the factoid. During the dispute over Kansas, a group known as the New England Immigrant Company, which was an abolitionist-backed group that was hoping to encourage Kansas's admittance as a free state, began sending what were called Beecher's Bibles to Kansas, and they were usually sent to Kansas in boxes that didn't exactly identify what they were, shall we say. Sometimes the boxes might have said tools or books. It's kind of a myth that they said Bibles, but nonetheless, there's no evidence that any of the boxes said Bibles, but there is evidence that they said books, for example. But the Beecher's Bible was actually a rifle. They were called Sharps rifles, and they were breech-loading rifles, which was a really high-tech weapon of the day, that were being sent to Kansas to be distributed to anti-slave advocates in Kansas. And the idea was that, if necessary, force could be needed and used to prevent pro-slavery advocates from swaying Kansas towards being a slave state. And so the factoid is the Beecher's Bible, which was actually a Sharps rifle, a breech-loading rifle being sent from free states in the Northeast to anti-slave advocates in Kansas to help ensure the free state classification of Kansas as it sought admittance into the Union. And of course, violence will outbreak on both sides, from pro-slave advocates and to free state advocates. So the Beecher's Bible, the Sharps rifle, sent in poorly identified boxes. Okay, guys, I hope that's clear. Send me that factoid no later than Wednesday by midnight. Get your bonus point added to the test, and let's have a great week.